everyone. Welcome to Understanding People, brought to you by getAbstract. I'm Kirsten, and I'm your host for this second season. So to let all of you know a little bit about what we are doing here is we are asking how-to questions this season. So if you watched season 1, we talked with authors and experts across our getAbstract network about how to and discussing interpersonal communication and how to do that better, how to understand others and understand ourselves. This season, we're talking to more authors about how to manage different things. As 2021 has come along, it's brought out a lot of uncertainty, and we want to give you very practical tools that you can implement in your workplace as well as at home, in both your personal and professional lives, to help you to understand yourself and others better so that you can build an unshakable foundation for success in 2021 and really beyond. So that's what we're doing here. I have an incredible guest today who has an amazing story, which I cannot wait for him to share with you. And before I introduce him, I want to let you know what we're talking about. So we are talking today about how to manage a crisis. And I think most of us can say that's very immediately relatable for me in my life right now, given everything that's gone on in the last year or so. But he has an incredible story of how he managed a crisis and is going to offer some really, really practical tools for leaders and really no matter where you are within an organization to manage a crisis and come out on the other side having learned something very, very practical for your own life. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our guest, Matt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we dive in, I'll read your bio so people can know a little bit more about you. Matt is a social entrepreneur and, of course, an author of the book Serve to Be Great, Leadership Lessons from a Prison, a Monastery, and a Boardroom, which, of course, is in our getAbstract library. So if you want to check out the book, you can read it there. And then, of course, you should buy it and read the whole thing. He is an international keynote speaker. He's a trainer and a consultant with the prestigious Perth Leadership Institute, and his clients have included numerous Fortune 500 companies. He works with companies, associations, universities, and nonprofits to develop highly effective leaders who achieve lasting success by focusing on serving and inspiring greatness in the people around them. Matt envisions a world where the vast majority of people realize that effectively serving others is the key to true greatness. So, Matt, welcome. We're very, very glad to have you.
Thank you again.
Yeah. So first of all, how did you get to where you are now, writing books and speaking and advocating servant leadership, which we're going to talk about later? I know that it is a long, detailed, and incredibly dramatic story, but give us the short version.
Sure. I think the shortest version of all is I'm just a big screw up. My journey towards doing what I do now, it started actually with my greatest failure, which this was just about 20 years ago now. Yeah. So in 2001, about 20 years ago, I was a young dude right out of college, about 24, and serving in the United States Marine Corps as an officer. And again, it's keeping this very short. I made a very bad decision to take a shortcut to success. And I took several steps to attempt a fraud against the US government. I didn't actually go through with it, but the steps that I had taken made me guilty of an attempted fraud. And as a result of being both dishonest and pretty stupid, I ended up spending 5.5 years confined to prison. And of course, at first this was like, I just thought my life was over. I was suicidal for a little while. And it just seemed like the worst thing that would ever happen to me. At the time it was, but about, I don't know, maybe 3 months into it, I started to adjust a little bit. And as I'm sure we'll talk about more, there was just this kind of shift towards turning towards all of the things that I'd been avoiding, turning towards all of the quote unquote problems in my life, whether they were real or imagined, and asking what good can come out of this in terms of learning and serving others. And very fortunately for me, this, in a roundabout way, it kind of led to learning about a very simple practice. About a year into my time in confinement, I started learning about a practice called mindfulness. And I'm very type A, as you probably guessed from what you know about me so far. So this made so much sense to me. When something makes sense to me, I go at it 100%. And I started training mindfulness very, very diligently. About 6 months after starting, I was actually making the effort to practice this way of training the mind during almost every waking moment of the day. And it was around that time when I realized, oh my gosh, I am actually thriving in one of the most stressful environments in the world. And I was actually happier in a prison with no possessions, no girlfriend, no fun, nothing. I was happier there than I'd ever been in my life. So this inspired me to go as deep as I could with the practice. I ended up training, living and training as a monk for the last 3.5, 4 years while I was confined, and then trained in a real monastery afterwards. And there were two real big shifts that came out of this experience. One was, I kind of alluded to this already, that I had this, what I consider a true blessing. I think a lot of us maybe believe that we can be happy regardless of what happens to us. But we don't know that. We haven't been through that experience of something where you literally have nothing and it's the worst thing you could possibly imagine. And then discovering like, oh yeah, it's actually, not only is it okay, but you can actually thrive even in this situation. But the other was that, the monastic ideal is completely about giving up our own short-term self-interest and seeing the collective whole about, the people around us, the organization around us, and what can we do to contribute to the collective well-being? And to put it most succinctly, what can we do to serve others? Not being so focused on our own short-term self-interest. And that I found that very, very inspiring, and it transformed my time in confinement into the most meaningful experience of my life. And then it's just been my focus ever since. So I started off co-founding and leading a couple nonprofits.
Writing books and stuff. Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to say, so then, how did you get from that moment or being in a monastery to now being back here, and we see you're in a blue shirt.
Yeah,
You work with.
Almost didn't happen, Kristen. I was very close to, I trained in a monastery for a while. In fact, I told the monks that I was going to ordain because I just felt like that's how I could be of greatest service. And then I realized later on that that's probably not true. That was more of me trying to avoid facing some of the difficulties of life. So I felt like the more service-oriented thing to do would be to be out here in the real world. But when I realized that, look, there's nothing more important in life than making an impact in the lives of others. How can I do that? So I started, like most people do who think that way, I started in the nonprofit sector, and I co-founded and led 2 small nonprofits. And it was while I was running the second one that I was noticing how applying the effort to really take care of team members and think about their long-term well-being and their growth, both personal and professional, that engagement levels were high. People were very loyal. They put in extra hours without even volunteers. People weren't even paying, this. So it occurred to me, maybe some of the things that I've learned would be helpful to other leaders. And so I started just doing some trainings locally. One thing led to another. Before I know it, Wiley agreed to publish a book that I wrote, and then that just, things just kept growing and serving more and more leaders in different organizations. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now.
Wow. Your journey is incredible. And obviously, if people want to know more, I just encourage them to read the abstract and to read the whole book. But, I would love to hear from you in those very, very dark moments, wherever they were, whether they were before you were in prison, or later when you were trying to make that decision about whether you should stay in the monastery or go back to real life. In those darkest moments, how did mindfulness help you? How did these new skills that you were learning help you to push through that crisis moment and turn it into, as you described, a gift, a blessing, turn it into something positive?
Yeah, I think the biggest and probably the simplest takeaway actually as well is just this very, this subtle shift in how we respond to a problem, which is, whenever there's a problem, it's natural for there to be emotions that are associated with that, usually in some range of the fight or flight response, right? So it's anger or frustration or anxiety or depression. I mean, all of these things could be happening at the same time, actually, and they were for me, actually, when I was first confined. But when things go wrong, this is what happens to the body. The body feels like it's threatened, and these emotions come up. And our natural tendency as humans, and I think it's reinforced by society, is that we should either ignore these, pretend that they're not there, and put on a face of, oh, everything's okay, Or if we're very analytical and we're very identified with thinking, which is, again, this probably applies to probably 90% of people, we get into these thought loops and we get stuck in this negative thought loop that then reinforces the emotion that we're trying to hide. And that makes it stronger. And it creates this continually negatively reinforcing loop. So the idea for just at a high level for any type of problematic situation or crisis situation that I think is most helpful is to really turn towards it. So not to try to avoid the problems that are associated with it, not to try to overlook them or undermine how serious they are, but to have a very objective analysis of, well, this is exactly what's happening. Now, to be more specific to your question, Kristen, like at the personal level, this is it's a turning inward. So it's a turning towards the internal problems. So it's really recognizing, being totally honest about, hey, there's this thing is pretty screwed up right now. You know, there's a lot of anxiety. And instead of judging oneself, or which is one problematic response, or feeding the anxiety by continuing to go back to the negative thoughts that are facilitating this anxiety, is to just say, well, let's just explore anxiety itself. What is this emotion? Where do I find it in the body?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, okay, there's some butterflies in the stomach. There's some tension here. And what happens is that immediately takes you out of the thought loop, right? And you start to be a little bit more grounded in this awareness of the body. And that gives you perspective on the thoughts. And this is really, in my view, and please, I hope no one considers me an expert at anything. I just, because I don't feel that way. But if there's one thing that I could offer where I do feel like I have a good deal of experience, it's this very simple approach to creating this, what we would call an objective self-awareness, which I humbly assert is the most critical skill that leaders can develop. To have an objective awareness to where we see our thoughts objectively. We're not identified with them. We just see there's a thought about this, there's a thought about that. It's not me or mine. This is just a tool that's running. And the same with the emotions. And I've actually never met a leader that disagrees with that, Kristen. I mean, if you really think about what is the meta skill that influences everything that every other aspect of leadership and even personal life, it's self-awareness. So this is a very tangible way to develop self-awareness. It's actually practice noticing what's going on in this thing that I call me, this self, which is at the emotional level first. Then that starts giving you a little bit more space to where instead of feeling like ideas are just impinging upon us and we're trapped in them, it's like, okay, there's a little bit of space around these ideas. And that freedom is what creates, okay, now there's opportunities to respond instead of just reacting out of conditioning.
Right. You're controlling it, the problem, the emotional difficulty, the struggle, whether it's internal or external, rather than it controlling you.
Yeah, indirectly. Yeah, you're not trying to control the emotion. You're not trying to control thoughts, but indirectly by instead of either feeding it or ignoring it, it's just that there's something in between those two, which is just this. It's just, if this is awareness looking outward, it's just taking that awareness and looking at the body itself, almost as though you're seeing your body as though it's not even you. You just kind of look, hey, there's a body sitting in a chair. What's going on with this thing? And as you get better at staying with that, what happens is then you do have more control over the situation, because I think we would all agree, if the degree to which we're in the fight or flight response is the degree to which we're not going to effectively deal with the situation. We're not going to effectively deal with people, because if we're anxious or angry, we're not going to deal with people in a way that inspires them or helps them overcome whatever emotions they're dealing with. And we're certainly, this is well understood, I think, by almost everyone. You're less rational. You're just simply less cognitively able to function, because most of your brain activity is down in the amygdala instead of in your prefrontal cortex, where you can actually come up with good solutions.
Yeah, what people call the lizard brain.
The reptile brain.
Yeah, so helpful. And I just encourage people as well, if you want to read more about mindfulness, we do have a whole channel and a whole lot of literature as well in the Get Abstract library about mindfulness and how to do that more practically. I want to shift gears now and turn our second half of the conversation to the concept of servant leadership, something that I know you've done lots of video interviews on this, and just there's lots of great content that you've already put out about this concept. And we hear it a lot now in leadership as well. What exactly is servant leadership? And then I want to bust some myths about it as well, because it is so trendy and we do hear so much more about it now that I just, I want to do some myth busting. But first of all, what is servant leadership in your view?
Well, it kind of depends on who you ask. The basic idea is that we have a traditional paradigm of leadership, right? Which is the leader's at the top and everyone else in an organization serves the leader. And the basic premise of servant leadership is that is reversed. A leader sees herself or himself as their primary responsibility is to serve the team members that report to her or him. So it's a flip of this traditional paradigm. But to more to your question is, well, what does that actually mean? So what is it? Does that mean I'm going around like bringing snacks to everybody all day? I mean, am I a waiter? Yeah, exactly. To me, what's most important here is this fundamental shift in what it means to be a leader. Because, and just to be extra clear, I'm creating a division here between management and leadership. Okay, so management, I mean, you can read a book on management and be good at it, right? We're talking about very like competencies that are easily learned. And if you're in a leadership role, you probably have most of those competencies or you wouldn't have been promoted there in the first place. Leadership, in my view, is the ability to inspire greatness in the people that report to us. So if I have a strategy that's been created, but I can't inspire anyone to execute on that strategy, what good is it? Right? So leadership is the ability to inspire people to be the best version of themselves and to be truly great, both personally and professionally. And so to do that, I think the most effective way to do that is to have this true commitment to the long-term well-being of the people that report to us. So we're thinking very holistically about the human being, not just what can we extract from them in terms of value in the workplace. It's shifting away from that, and instead of it's what can I give this person to help them thrive, so that they're thriving personally and that they're thriving professionally. They have the tools that they need to do their job well. Their obstacles that would prohibit them from doing their job are removed. They're growing continuously. They feel like people around them care about them. All the things that the human beings, the basic needs we have to thrive, all of those are met. And then, if you really want to take it to the highest level, going even beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask you to answer this objection. Let's say someone is listening to this and they manage a team, or they are aspiring to higher leadership, perhaps in their organization, or, they just want to be a better leader wherever they are in the moment. But they say, my company is in crisis. The team that I manage is in crisis. There's so many fires burning in so many places that I'm overwhelmed. How am I supposed to focus now on being a servant leader? Is that really what the organization needs right now? We just need to focus on processes, or we just need to focus on results. That this concept is too high-minded and too abstract for what they need to get done in their day-to-day. Why is servant leadership even more important for someone like that, who's maybe in a crisis moment themselves?
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, actually, Kristen. It sounds like you feel the same way. I think it's even more important now. And the reason being is that human beings don't function well when they're not well. So, if you have people that are constantly feeling anxiety because of not necessarily because of what you're doing as the leader, but just because of the situation of life, then anything you're doing to not alleviate that is directly impeding their ability to perform at their best levels. And so I actually see this kind of coming back to this idea of turning towards, right? Is like a lot of people see the current crisis that we've been facing as a global community for the last, it's 12 months now, over 12 months. There's so many negative things coming out of this. I actually see this as a huge opportunity in so many ways. I mean, I can't even count the ways, but the two biggest ones are as leaders and as entrepreneurs, because I mean, the basic function of entrepreneurs is to solve a problem, right? And I kind of see that as the basic function of a servant leader as well. So you have this opportunity as a leader right now. There are going to be many teams that fall apart because of this crisis, right? You have people working in isolation at home. They're stressed out of their minds because of all the things that are happening just in their day-to-day lives, let alone what's happening at work. So there's almost this opportunity to be a savior in essence of like, what would happen if you can create an environment where people actually become more well as a result of their work, of showing up to work?
That's really cool.
I can tell you what's going to happen. One is that people who feel like, and I'll give a tangible example of what I mean by this in a second, but if people feel like the leaders genuinely care about them and are proactively concerned about their well-being and taking steps to improve their well-being, what do you think the effects of that are going to be? I mean, obviously in the immediate, if I'm an employee, I'm going to be more effective if I'm not caught in anxious thoughts all day, right? I'm not going to be trying to distract myself from my pain by surfing on the internet or whatever it is people distract themselves with. So my performance is going to be better for the organization. But also, I'm going to look at the leaders and say, wow, like this could have ruined the company. But instead, like, look at what they're doing to take care of us and make sure we all survive as a team. I'm never leaving this place. So you have the ability, like teams can crises either end teams because it's handled poorly, or it can make teams stronger than they've ever been when people come together and figure out how to work together as a team to solve problems. And that's what this can become. This can become an opportunity if we're truly caring about people and making sure that people have what they need to thrive emotionally, that their well-being is taken care of. Now their creative capacities are opened up to think, well, instead of complaining about stuff, how do we work together to solve problems internally in our organization? But even better is now that anyone who's customer facing is asking better questions of customers and saying, well, I bet you have problems you've never thought of as a result of this crisis. There's more opportunity for an entrepreneurial organization, any type of for-profit business, or even nonprofit or governmental, to say, what other problems can we be solving for our customers? And whole new opportunities, new fields can be opened up for business solutions.
Yeah.
So that's why I truly see this as an opportunity. But I just come back to your original question. It starts with people, right? And if I don't take the time as a leader to check in a human way with the people that work for me, none of the stuff that I just mentioned is going to happen. It might at a small scale if you're lucky, but it's not going to be something that can be replicated in a systematic way. Whereas if we truly take the time to say, look, the well-being of my team member, if I have the title of a leader, or if I'm in a position of being a leader, my number one responsibility should be helping the people that report to me to thrive. And if I function in that way and they're thriving emotionally, at least as best as they can, given all of the circumstances, or they're not mired in anxiety, that's where this all starts. It starts with humans who are well, right? Who are not mired in these fight or flight emotions, impeding their success.
Yep. It's all, at the end of the day, very basic, isn't it? I mean, mental health and well-being is the foundation of success, both in our personal lives, as well as being a member of a good team, as well as how we can inspire others. And so taking care of ourselves first and then taking care of the people around us is absolutely essential.
Yeah, I have one more thing to add to that, Kristen, just
Absolutely.
to give a very solid business example of this. So, it can be very easy to see, especially in a crisis, to say, oh, taking the extra 20 minutes on a Zoom call with a remote employee to ask about their kids and help them deal with something that they're dealing with at home is not a good investment of my time as a leader. And I think that's coming back to the short-term thinking, right? We're thinking about our own short-term self-interest or the short-term self-interest of the team or the organization. And that's going to gradually create negative outcomes, where that little bit of time invested now is what can create all the positive things we just mentioned a moment ago. To give you a perfect example of this, many of you may be familiar with a leader named Doug Conant, who was asked to take over Campbell's Soup. I think it was in the early 2000s, if I remember right. And one of his core tenets was, he said, look, I want to get a certain number of steps in every day, and I want to make sure I'm having one-to-one interactions with team members. He spent a good, maybe half of his time, if not more, out of his office, checking in with people one-to-one, checking to see how they're doing. And I mean, you would think, if anything, this was a company, by the way, at this time, Campbell's was either, it was basically every analyst agreed, they're either going to go bankrupt or they're going to be bought. Yeah. Because they were in such dire straits. They had gone from a global giant to basically they were at the verge of bankruptcy. You would think, oh, that's a crisis, right? We don't have time to check in with people. We got to do this. We got to do that. That's not what Doug Conant did. He spent at least half of his time out of his office checking in one-on-one with people. And he turned around a company that should not have survived. And he did it fairly quickly. It was a matter of years. It didn't take a decade to turn it around, but after a decade, they were a global powerhouse again. But it was that small investment every day in individuals that created the ripple effect of, well, now we have people who are able, they feel well enough and they feel inspired enough and empowered enough to actually execute on the strategies. And of course, Conant and his team had some excellent strategies for turning products around and marketing, but no one would have executed on that if everyone was in crisis mode all the time.
Awesome example. Yeah, and something very, very meaningful, I'm sure, to people who are listening. So much wisdom, Matt, that you have shared. Thank you so much. And I really hope that this was also very inspiring to all of you who are listening. And again, I encourage you to read the whole book and his story and his insights. But last question before you go, and that is one I've asked every guest in the series so far, and that is, what are you optimistic about in 2021? What are you looking forward to?
That's a long list, Kristen. Should I just pick one?
That's good. That's great. Yeah, sure. Pick one or three. But yeah, I always like
I think overall, they all kind of are under the same theme, which is I'm extremely optimistic about people doing what we're talking about here. What kicked off the discussion was turning towards these problems, and I shouldn't use air quotes for that because there are some very real problems here, but that problem is really a perception of the mind. There are things that are obviously creating negative circumstances in society, but those can be opportunities for someone else to serve, right, and to really make an impact. And I'm extremely optimistic about, it seems like we're kind of rounding the curve with this global pandemic, and that we've learned a lot as a global community, where, hey, we have to work together. Like if one country's got this type of lockdown and the other one doesn't, and they're traveling between each other, I mean, like, you might as well not do anything, right? Yeah. So we kind of have to all work together to be able to solve these super, super important crises. And I'm extremely optimistic to see how this kind of renewed connectivity, and I think this renewed inspiration to solve big problems, I'm really curious to see how that translates into other big problems being solved. Because we have a lot, right? There are a lot of issues in our planet that we have not successfully solved yet. And so I'm extremely optimistic to see how all of this optimism about, okay, we're finally coming out of this, and we've learned a lot about how to work together. And not that we've done it perfectly, but we've made lots of mistakes, but there's lots of learning. How are we going to apply that to solve other big problems and make a very big impact in our world? So that's what I'm most optimistic about. And hopefully, to whatever degree I can facilitate that, is what also inspires the optimism there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful way to end. Matt, thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you for your story, and thank you for the great work that you're doing. It's very much appreciated.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks again for having me, Kristen.
Yeah. And thank all of you so much for watching and joining us for this episode. We'll be back with more, so stay tuned to getAbstract's social media channels to learn about our next upcoming episode, guest, and topic. And of course, if you ever have any feedback or topics that you'd like to suggest, we're always open and willing to hear those. And we would love to hear your thoughts. But we really appreciate you joining us for this episode in our series, Understanding People. Again, if you want to read more about Matt's book, Serve to Be Great, you can find that in our getAbstract library, but you should really read the whole thing. So thank you very much for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you may be in the world. And we'll see you back here very soon. Bye.